My best friends kept their daughter's adoption a secret for 5 years. I exposed the truth and lost my friends. But the story doesn't end there. I, 34F, have known Debbie, 35F, and Jimmy, 36M, since our freshman year of college. We met during orientation week and instantly clicked. Debbie was my roommate, and Jimmy lived down the hall in our dorm. We became inseparable, spending countless nights studying together, exploring the city, and supporting each other through the ups and downs of college life. After graduation, we all ended up in the same city. Debbie and Jimmy started dating, and I was there to witness their relationship blossom. I remember the night Jimmy proposed. He enlisted my help to set up a romantic picnic in the park where they had their first date. When Debbie said yes, I was the first person they called to share the news. I was the maid of honor at their wedding 10 years ago. It was a beautiful ceremony, and I'll never forget the look of pure joy on their faces as they said their vows. During my speech at the reception, I joked about how I'd be the cool aunt to their future kids. Little did we know the journey to parenthood would be much more complicated than any of us anticipated. Debbie and Jimmy started trying for a baby almost immediately after getting married. Months turned into years with no success. I watched as my friends went through the emotional roller coaster of infertility, the hope, the disappointment, the medical procedures, and the toll it took on their relationship. I tried to be there for them as much as I could, offering a shoulder to cry on and a listening ear whenever they needed it. After 5 years of trying, multiple rounds of IVF, and 2 heartbreaking miscarriages, Debbie and Jimmy decided to explore adoption. I supported them wholeheartedly, helping them research agencies and even offering to be a reference for their home study. Their adoption journey was filled with its own set of challenges. There were 2 potential adoptions that fell through at the last minute, leaving Debbie and Jimmy devastated. But finally, 5 years ago, they got the call they'd been waiting for. A baby girl had been born, and the birth mother had chosen them as the adoptive parents. I'll never forget the day they brought Delilah home. Debbie and Jimmy were beaming with pride and love for their new daughter. I was there to help them settle in, bringing meals and offering to babysit whenever they needed a break. Watching my best friends finally become parents was one of the happiest moments of my life. However, I soon noticed something that made me uncomfortable. Debbie and Jimmy were adamant about keeping Delilah's adoption a secret. They moved to a new city shortly after the adoption, claiming it was for Jimmy's job, but I knew the real reason was so they could start fresh where no one knew their history. At first, I thought they were just being cautious, maybe waiting until Delilah was older to tell her. But as time went on, it became clear that they never intended to tell Delilah she was adopted. They've told me repeatedly that they want to keep it a secret forever, believing it's in Delilah's best interest. I've always struggled with this decision. Growing up, I had a complicated family situation myself. My dad left when I was young, and my mom never talked about him. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I found out he had another family he kept secret from us. The revelation shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. That experience made me a firm believer in the importance of honesty and transparency in families. I've tried to gently broach the subject with Debbie and Jimmy a few times over the years, suggesting that Delilah might want to know about her origins someday. But they've always shut down the conversation, insisting that they're Delilah's real parents and that's all that matters. I've kept quiet out of respect for my friends, but it's always bothered me. Last month, I flew out to visit them for Delilah's 5th birthday party. It was a princess-themed extravaganza, with Delilah dressed up as her favorite Disney character. Watching her laughing and playing with her friends, I couldn't help but think about how she had no idea about the long journey her parents went through to have her. After the party, I was helping Debbie clean up while Jimmy took Delilah to the park. As I was gathering up wrapping paper in the living room, I accidentally knocked over Debbie's purse. As I was picking up the spilled contents, I found some paperwork that looked like adoption records. Without thinking, I quickly snapped a photo of the papers with my phone before putting everything back. When I got back to my hotel that night, I looked at the photo more closely. It had the name and contact information for Delilah's birth mother. I was shocked to realize that I actually knew her. Amber, 29F, had been a freshman when we were seniors in college. We weren't close friends, but we had some mutual acquaintances in the theater department. I remembered Amber as a vibrant, artistic girl who was always involved in the campus theater productions. I had no idea she'd had a baby, let alone given one up for adoption. It made me wonder about her story and what led her to make that decision. For weeks, I agonized over what to do with this information. Part of me felt like Delilah deserves to know the truth, and that keeping such a big secret from her is wrong. I thought about how I felt when I discovered the truth about my own father, and how much I wish someone had been honest with me from the beginning. But I also felt incredibly guilty for betraying Debbie and Jimmy's trust by taking that photo. They're my best friends, and I know how much they love Delilah. I worried about how finding out she's adopted might affect Delilah, and whether it would damage her relationship with Debbie and Jimmy. After going back and forth for what felt like 1,000 times, I finally decided to reach out to Amber. I crafted a careful message explaining the situation and asking if she'd be open to meeting Delilah someday if Delilah ever found out she was adopted and wanted to meet her birth mother. Amber responded almost immediately. She was overjoyed to hear about Delilah and said she'd love to meet her. She told me she's always regretted giving Delilah up for adoption, but she was only 24 and not in a position to be a mother at the time. She had just graduated college and was pursuing her dream of becoming a Broadway actress. She's now married with 2 other children, but has always wondered about Delilah. Now I'm in an impossible situation. I have this huge secret that could massively impact multiple people's lives. I feel like Delilah deserves to know the truth about her origins. Debbie and Jimmy are my best friends, but I strongly disagree with their choice to keep Delilah's adoption a secret. Part of me wants to tell Debbie and Jimmy what I've done and encourage them to be honest with Delilah. But I'm terrified of losing my best friends. We've been through so much together: college, their wedding, their struggle with infertility, and now raising Delilah. The thought of throwing away 15 years of friendship is heartbreaking. Another part of me thinks I should just keep quiet and let Debbie and Jimmy handle this how they see fit. But that feels wrong too, like I'm complicit in deceiving an innocent child. I keep thinking about how I felt when I found out about my dad's secret family, and I don't want Delilah to go through that same sense of betrayal. I'm really struggling with what the right thing to do is here. Should I tell Debbie and Jimmy what I know? Should I somehow try to tell Delilah herself? Or should I just keep this secret and mind my own business? I feel like there's no good option and someone is going to end up hurt no matter what. Any advice would be appreciated. Update 1, it's been about a month since my original post, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone for their advice and perspectives. After a lot of thought, I decided I needed to talk to Debbie and Jimmy. I invited them to visit me for a weekend, saying I missed them and wanted to catch up. They arrived on Friday evening with Delilah in tow. We spent Saturday doing fun family activities, visiting a local children's museum, having a picnic in the park, and getting ice cream. It was a wonderful day, but I felt the weight of my secret hanging over me the entire time. On Sunday morning, I asked my neighbor to take Delilah to the playground so I could have some alone time with Debbie and Jimmy. Once Delilah was gone, I sat them down in my living room and took a deep breath. I started by telling them how much I valued their friendship and how much I loved Delilah. Then, with shaking hands, I confessed everything, finding the paperwork, taking the photo, and contacting Amber. The room fell silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, all hell broke loose. Jimmy jumped up, his face red with anger, and started yelling about how I had betrayed their trust and had no right to interfere in their family. Debbie was sobbing uncontrollably, saying I'd ruined everything they'd worked so hard for. I tried to explain my perspective, that I believed Delilah had a right to know her own history and medical background. I told them about my own experience finding out about my dad's secret family and how much it had affected me. But they weren't having any of it. The argument got pretty heated. Jimmy said some really hurtful things, calling me a terrible friend and accusing me of trying to steal their daughter. He brought up all the times I'd been there for them during their fertility struggles, saying I must have been faking my support if I could betray them like this. Debbie kept saying over and over that I destroyed their family and that Delilah would hate them if she ever found out. I started crying too, telling them I never meant to hurt anyone and that I only wanted what was best for Delilah. I reminded them of all we'd been through together and begged them to understand that I was coming from a place of love for Delilah. After about an hour of back and forth, Jimmy said they needed to leave. He practically dragged Debbie out of the house, pausing only to grab Delilah from the playground. As they were leaving, Jimmy said they needed time away from me to figure out what to do. Debbie wouldn't even look at me as they drove away. I felt awful. Even though I still believe Delilah deserves the truth, seeing how upset my friends were made me question if I'd done the right thing. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying the argument over and over in my head. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of angry text messages from Debbie and Jimmy. They said they never wanted to speak to me again and that I was no longer welcome in their lives or Delilah's life. Debbie called me a backstabbing BTCH and Jimmy said he regretted ever trusting me. I was devastated. These were my best friends for over 15 years, and now it seemed like our friendship was over. I tried calling and texting to apologize and explain myself further, but they both blocked my number. A few days later, I got a message request on Facebook from Amber. She thanked me for reaching out about Delilah but said she decided it wasn't her place to interfere in Delilah's life. She said she appreciated knowing Delilah was loved and cared for, but she was going to respect Debbie and Jimmy's wishes and not pursue any contact. I'm relieved Amber made that choice, as it takes some of the pressure off the situation. But I'm still heartbroken about potentially losing my best friends. I keep wondering if I should have just kept my mouth shut and minded my own business. I've been going through old photos and mementos from our friendship, remembering all the good times we've shared. There's the ticket stub from the first concert we all went to in college, photos from our graduation day, the bridesmaid dress I wore at their wedding. Each memory makes the loss of their friendship even more painful. I'm giving Debbie and Jimmy some space for now, hoping they'll cool off and we can eventually talk things out. But I'm worried our friendship may be damaged beyond repair. I've thought about reaching out to some of our mutual friends to see if they can help mediate, but I'm afraid of dragging more people into this mess. I still believe I did the right thing morally, but the personal cost has been enormous. I miss my friends, and I miss Delilah. I keep thinking about her upcoming kindergarten graduation and how I'll likely miss it. It breaks my heart to think about all the milestones in Delilah's life that I might not be part of now. For now, I'm trying to focus on work and other friendships to distract myself from the situation. But it's hard not to dwell on what's happened and wonder if there was a better way I could have handled things. Update 2. It's been about 2 months since my last update, and the situation has taken some unexpected turns. About 3 weeks ago, I ran into Debbie at the grocery store. I had been avoiding our usual haunts, afraid of bumping into them, but I guess fate had other plans. It was incredibly awkward at first. She tried to ignore me, busying herself with examining a display of apples. But I couldn't let the opportunity pass. I approached her to apologize again, my heart pounding in my chest. To my surprise, Debbie broke down crying right there in the middle of the produce section. People were starting to stare, so I gently guided her outside to a nearby bench. Once she calmed down, we decided to go to a nearby coffee shop to talk. As we sat down with our coffees, Debbie confessed that she and Jimmy had been fighting constantly since finding out what I'd done. The stress of keeping Delilah's adoption a secret had been weighing on them for years, and my actions had brought all those issues to the surface. Debbie admitted that she'd always felt guilty about not telling Delilah the truth, but Jimmy was adamant about keeping it secret. She said Jimmy has some deep-seated issues stemming from his own childhood. His parents divorced when he was young, and he felt abandoned by his father. Apparently, Jimmy's father had started a new family and rarely made time for Jimmy. Debbie thinks that's why he's so terrified of Delilah feeling like she doesn't belong in their family. I listened as Debbie poured out her heart, telling me about the strain this secret had put on their marriage. She said they'd been to couples counseling a few times over the years, but Jimmy always refused to discuss the adoption issue with the therapist. I apologized again for going behind their backs, explaining my own complicated history with family secrets. Debbie seemed to really hear me this time. I gently suggested that maybe this could be an opportunity for them to be honest with Delilah. Debbie seemed receptive to the idea, but said she was scared of how Jimmy would react. We talked for over 2 hours, reminiscing about old times and discussing how we might move forward. By the end, Debbie thanked me for listening and said she'd think about what I said. She wasn't ready to fully forgive me yet, but it felt like a step in the right direction. A week later, Debbie called me. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she'd been crying. She said she'd finally confronted Jimmy about telling Delilah the truth. They had a huge fight that lasted most of the night, but eventually Jimmy agreed to family counseling to work through the issue. They haven't told Delilah yet, but they're working with a therapist to figure out the best way to approach it. Debbie asked if I'd be willing to meet with them and the therapist to talk through everything that happened. I agreed immediately, grateful for the chance to repair our friendship. We had our first session last week. It was emotional and difficult at times, but I think it was productive. Jimmy is still angry with me, but he's starting to understand why I did what I did. We talked about our long history together, the good times and the bad, and how we might rebuild trust. The therapist suggested we all write letters to Delilah, explaining our feelings and hopes for her future. We're going to discuss these letters in our next session. It's a challenging exercise, but I think it's helping us all focus on what's really important, Delilah's well-being. We're scheduled for more sessions in the coming weeks. I'm cautiously optimistic that we might be able to salvage our friendship. More importantly, it seems like Debbie and Jimmy are moving towards being honest with Delilah. It's going to be a long, complicated process, but I believe it's the right thing for everyone involved. Update 3. It's been about 6 months since my last update. A lot has changed, and I wanted to share a final update on the situation. Debbie, Jimmy, and I continued with family therapy sessions for several months. It was a challenging process, but slowly we began to rebuild trust and understanding. Jimmy eventually opened up about his own childhood trauma and how it affected his fears about Delilah knowing she was adopted. With the therapist's help, he started to work through those issues. During one particularly emotional session, Jimmy shared a memory from his childhood. He was about 10 years old, and his father had promised to come to his Little League baseball game. Jimmy waited and waited, but his dad never showed up. Later, he found out his father had been at his half-sister's dance recital instead. Jimmy said that was the moment he realized he would never be as important to his father as his real family. It was heartbreaking to hear, but it helped me understand why he was so afraid of Delilah feeling that way. As we worked through these issues in therapy, we also started spending time together socially again. It was awkward at first, but gradually we fell back into our old rhythms. We had a game night at my place, and for a moment, it felt just like old times. About 2 months ago, Debbie and Jimmy finally sat down with Delilah and told her she was adopted. They approached it gently, with guidance from their therapist. Delilah was understandably confused and had a lot of questions, but overall she took the news pretty well. They emphasized how much they loved her and that being adopted didn't change the fact that she was their daughter. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Debbie called me right after to let me know how it went. She said Delilah asked about her birth parents, and they told her they'd share more information when she's a bit older. They're planning to gradually give her more details as she grows up and can better understand the situation. To my surprise, Debbie and Jimmy asked me to be there when they eventually tell Delilah more about her birth mother. They said that since I was the one who pushed for honesty, they want me to be part of the process. I was touched by their forgiveness and inclusion. Our friendship has slowly been healing. Things aren't exactly the same as before, there's still some lingering tension and trust issues we're working through. But we're in a much better place than I ever thought we'd be 6 months ago. Last week, we all got together for dinner, me, Debbie, Jimmy, and Delilah. It was the first time I'd seen Delilah since they told her about the adoption. She gave me a big hug when I arrived, and during dinner, she peppered me with questions about what her parents were like in college. It was heartwarming to see her curiosity and openness. After Delilah went to bed, Debbie, Jimmy, and I stayed up late talking. We reminisced about our college days, laughing about old inside jokes and embarrassing moments. Jimmy even brought up the night he proposed to Debbie, thanking me again for helping him set it up. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and we were finally able to enjoy each other's company without the secret hanging over us. As I was leaving, Delilah came out of her room, saying she couldn't sleep. She asked if I could tuck her in. As I sat on the edge of her bed, she whispered, "Aunt Lisa, thank you for helping my parents tell me the truth." I'm not sure if Debbie and Jimmy told her about my role in everything, but it meant the world to me. Looking back, I still believe I did the right thing, even though my methods were flawed. I've learned a lot about communication, respecting boundaries, and the complexities of adoption. I'm grateful that this story seems to be heading towards a happy ending for everyone involved. Debbie and Jimmy have started attending a support group for adoptive parents, which seems to be helping them a lot. They're also talking about possibly reaching out to Amber in the future, to get more information about Delilah's medical history. It's a big step for them, and I'm proud of how far they've come. As for me, this experience has made me reflect on my own family history. I've started having more open conversations with my mom about my dad and his absence in my life. It's been difficult but healing. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support throughout this journey. It's been a challenging few months, but I'm optimistic about the future of my friendship with Debbie and Jimmy, and especially about Delilah growing up with honesty and openness about her origins. I know there will likely be more challenges ahead as Delilah grows up and processes her adoption story. But I'm committed to being there for her and for Debbie and Jimmy, however they need me. Our friendship has been tested, but I think it's ultimately become stronger for having gone through this together.